Hello everyone! So in this video we'll be going through data types in C. So if that's what you're looking for, stick around. So we're just going to start off with just going through the basic data types just in a little PowerPoint, and then we're going to be getting into the coding a little bit later. So there is void, which we don't really need to worry about right now. It's basically just like empty. There's characters, which is any kind of lettering alphabet kind of deal. It's represented in ASCII characters, so any kind of symbols also fall into that. And so then you have integers, which is basically any numbers without decimal points. And there is signed and unsigned that goes into this. So you'll see here that it's written unsigned, and anything that doesn't have anything in front of it is automatically signed. So signed just means that it has a positive or a negative value. So it's pretty easy to remember that if you have unsigned, it can't have a negative in front of it, so no sign. So any unsigned all has to be positive numbers, and signed can be positive or negative. Then you have floating points, which is anything with any number with decimal points. And then you have the different lengths of all of these numbers. So here we have short, int, long. So short is the smallest one, int is medium, and long is the longest one. The same goes for the floating point. Float is the smallest, double is the medium, and long double is the longest. And so this can be useful in case you know that you're going to be using, for example, all shorter numbers. So then you're able to save some space by using that, or if you need very, very long numbers, you're able to have that capability. In general, I'll just be using the middle ones though, but you just need to know that you have that option. So then we'll be getting into this later on. This is just basically here to show the range, but I had it a bit incomplete here, so we can kind of disregard this one for now. And then we have the different symbols attached to each variable type that you need to know. So this is more so in print statements that I'll be showing in a little bit. So the char needs to be represented by a C, the int needs to be represented by a D, and the float needs to be represented by an F. But we don't need to worry about that too much right now because I'll be showing it to you in just a second. So we're going to now go into the coding aspect. So here we have a little main open for us to be able to work with. If you have any problem setting up this, there is a video that I made previously that can help you get started. But right now we already have all of this set up and ready to go. So we are going to start off by defining some basic variables, and then later on I'll be able to fill them in more for you because there are a lot of different variation of those three basic types. So we're going to start off with the char. So to define a variable, you need to write the variable type here. So we wrote char, then we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to name it A because we're going to be naming them ABC, I think. And then in a char, you're able to use numbers or letter to be able to define it, because it is, as I said previously, based off of, ASCII and the symbols and the lettering in that. So you are able to put just a number to be able to get certain symbols. I'll be going into that a bit later on, but right now I'm just going to define it with just a letter. So I'm going to call it A for, its variable name. Then we're going to do an integer. So you're going to have your variable type, and you're going to name it whatever you want. So B, in this case, I'm naming it. And then you're just going to give it a value. So 1 is pretty standard. And then you're going to have a float. So then you name it, and then you give it a value. So then, to be able to print it out, so we're going to do a print F here, and you're just going to write, here is the value of A, and then, so you need a placeholder here for your value because this is just a text here. So it won't be able to see your variable. So you do that percent sign and then the symbol associated with your data type. So for char it is C, for int it is D, and for float it is F. So then you do your variable that you're putting in for this placeholder. So it is A and our semicolon. And so then we can start without debugging. And I didn't put a next line here, which we can do to make it a little bit more readable. So \n, but it's the same idea that we get the value A. So now we can do this, but with more than one of these variables. So here's the value of A. So it's about the same thing. So you just do of B. And so then we can put in our placeholder, percent, and then for the integer it is D, and we put our variable in, so our variable is B, and then here we do printing out C, so we do percent, and then for a float it is F, and we remember to put our variable, and that's it. So we can now run it, and we will see that all of our variables will be showing up. Here the float printed out with some extra decimal points, and there are ways to format it in different ways that all those decimal points don't come up, but we're not too worried about that right now. And so when I come back after this little pause, I'm going to be able to have all the different variations of signed, unsigned, long, short listed on the screen for you with their given lengths. So, and then I'm just going to very quickly go over just a few tiny little details about them, and that'll be that. So I'll be right back. So now I filled in some of the ranges for you here and added some data types. So we're just going to go through some of them pretty quickly and just touch on some important parts of some of them. So we're going to start with running the program and just showing the output alongside all the lines of code. So we have a char here, and I've added another unsigned char here, which I didn't have previously. So here you can either assign a number to a char or lettering, because all the numbers are associated with the ASCII values. So you'll see here that in the unsigned it has 0 to 255, whereas the signed has them just in the negative range, but it's all the same, just shifted over. And that's just something you need to remember with any unsigned and signed values, that the unsigned will just be shifted the same amount that it was in the negatives, just over. And so now we have them all in the positive for the unsigned. So here we have just a number that I chose here, and it came up right on the command. And then you have just the letter that we decided to print coming out, and then you have a whole bunch of numbers that I've printed out, and I've listed the ranges because obviously that is harder to show, so I've just printed the number 1 in different ways. And so the int will be printing without any decimal points, the float will be printing with decimal points, the short int, long int, both printing without decimal points, but will have different ranges that are listed here, and the double and the long double, both with decimal points. And this is the last thing I wanted to touch on in this video, is the unsigned, and if you put in a negative number. So what we've been doing here is that that I talked about a bit earlier was the %C, %D, and %F. So the C is the char, the D is the int, and the F is the float. But when you're printing unsigned, what I didn't quite mention yet is that you need to be able to change this %D to a %U, regardless of whether or not it's an integer. It automatically becomes an unsigned. Otherwise, if you just do %D, it will interpret it as a signed value, so that's why it's giving us this negative, even though unsigned is technically supposed to be only positive numbers. And so now that we put this u here, we'll run it again, and we'll see that it's coming up as this huge number. So what it does is it takes the range, so we have the range right here, well, it kind of disappeared on us here, and it takes the number that you've assigned to h here, so here we have -1 and here's the range, and what it'll do is it'll subtract that number, well in this case add that number, to the total range, and so that's why you're getting this huge number. So here we have it ending in 9.6 and here we have 9.5, so it just takes it and adds that negative on, or subtracts it, however you want to interpret it, and that's why you're getting this huge number if you don't if you put that u here. So that's just something you need to remember with unsigned and signed numbers, and that's really all I had to show you right now. This was just another print statement that I had shown earlier on, that you're able to print more than one value. In the next video we'll be touching more on input and output. I did say I would do that last time, but I did want to get through variables first, but next time we will be doing input and output, so if you want to check that out, it will be in the next video. So stay tuned for that.